well, it's not a minor thing, but it's something we've already talked about. Obviously, the Melita Public Inquiry up at Chichester College. I found that out today at planning, that's been set for 6th of July. My understanding is that the discretionary rate relief will come up to grants and concessions. I think that's later this month or early next. I sit on that anyway, so that's a formality, really. That's all it is. I think CDC is very much taking a pragmatic view of LGR. It's happening. We aren't going to be able to stop it. And what they want to do is to get larger projects far enough down the road so they can't be reined back. The most important one of which, to those of us on the peninsula, is the sea defences down at Selsey. Because obviously if the sea defence is breached seriously in Selsey, then goodness knows what might happen. So that is being quite significantly accelerated in order to move that along quickly, as are some regeneration projects. But there isn't really anything else that's particularly impacted, certainly not to here or to Selsey either, really.
Thank you. I think the only thing I would like to feed back to you is that in tackling problems similar to Lodsworth, to Melita, Westbourne, all these sites,
Yeah.
I think CDC really does need to look at having a multidisciplinary, multi-agency approach, because you can't just do it on planning alone. Because the planning laws allow you to do so much, but you've got to really, and we've discussed it before, so anything you can do to drive that point home, saying we've got to get the police, we've got to get social services, we've got to get HMRC, etc., all involved to tackle the problem. Because until that happens, I genuinely, and I know the chairman agrees as well, that things will not be moving forward. So anything you can do to support that would be appreciated.
I think I don't want to give unrealistic expectations. There's two issues there. The first thing is that nothing that you've mentioned there is a material planning objection. None of those issues can be used in terms of planning. You know, that's
planning of going in overnight and taking the topsoil off.
Well, that's
a planning issue.
That's enforcement, or you know, you'd have to. But
yeah, but it's material.
In general, yes. But if someone then applies retrospectively for planning permission, then you know you would. If that happened, then obviously you would have to send enforcement in, and they would put a stop notice on it. That doesn't become, and I'm not defending it. I'm just saying how it is, because I don't like the planning process. I think it's appalling because it doesn't take into consideration the multiple variables that you've mentioned here. But unfortunately,
I'm not just talking about planning. I'm talking about the problem as a whole.
But I think that's the issue. That's the secondary issue, which is that if I were to take that to CDC, which I'm quite happy to do, and I've had this conversation on multiple occasions, their response is always the same, which is if you're talking about existing sites which cause issues, council doesn't really have any authority to pull together multidisciplinary meetings. We can't. Well, if there are issues, or it depends the nature of the issues on the site. You can't use that. What I don't think people really always take on board is that what you have mentioned it's very extraneous to the planning process.
That's why I'm asking you to take it in outside planning. Part of it's planning, but the big problem involves all these agencies. Now, if CDC were more proactive rather than reactive, all the problems which they may have with, I'll use Melita as an example. Should those 40 caravans be reduced to 9, CDC, I believe, they would have to be responsible for finding houses, homes, places for the people there to go. It's going to cost them a lot of money. if they stopped it early on, we'd be saving so much money. So they've got to be more proactive with multi-agency approach to these problems, rather than just waiting till something happens. And I fully understand that you can't send enforcement in until a breach has occurred. But it needs everybody to work together, not in stovepipes. And
I'm happy to take it, but previously, when we've had that discussion, the view has been it's not that if there's ASB, that's an issue to the police. If it's an HMRC issue, then that needs to be reported to HMRC.
Do they ever talk to each other, any of these people?
This is what I'm asking.
This I think is largely the problem. But actually I also think it's important not to overplay CDC's influence in this regard, because CDC is considered to be, it's the local planning authority, it's not HMRC, and it also can't get involved in police operations. You know, I think with Melita, I'm not defending what happened with Melita, because I don't believe that the police were I don't believe that the council was proactive enough when we realised that things were starting to deteriorate. But when we have previously gone to, I remember I had this conversation with the Director of Communities, they don't see that this multi-agency approach to pre-existing issues is an issue really for them. The police will deal with what they're dealing with, and if there are HMRC issues, then the HMRC need to deal with that. That's the problem we have.
Agreed with pre-existing issues, but let's look forward and say how about issues which may happen in the future. So, if you could just take the message and it's a conversation that I think we've had many times. You know, and it is an issue. We had an application today over in Westbourne for some G&T pitches. The good news is that we are very close now to reaching our quota. I think we were 15 this morning, we're now 6 less because we allowed 6 over in Westbourne. So we are very close, and of course once we hit our quota, then that's a lot easier to refuse anything else. And I did raise Sidlesham as an issue because we were talking about dominance today. And of course we have tried the argument of dominance and we've been woefully unsuccessful at appeal. So I'm hoping that we should not have too many more, if any more, applications for new sites. Let's end on a happy note.
Yes, a happy note.
Can I clarify? If the site is illegally being put to a site so a G&T site appears illegally, or they try to enter with garage, what is the best process, please?
No, because if they're entering private land,
Yeah.
that's not really a police issue,
Planning?
so you need to...
Well, no, if they own the land, obviously, but
Yeah, if they own the land and they suddenly decide to set up camp, well, that's an issue for enforcement.
enforcement straight away. That's the only
Don't
way.
even, don't even think twice. I mean, the issues that we had at Lurgishaw was that it was a bit, it was a bit contentious, and so, the police was involved, and we had to have emergency injunctions were being thought about over the weekends and things like that because of the nature of what was going on there. But generally speaking, if it looks like someone's going to turn up, enforcement without question straight away.
And do you know what happened at Sidlesham? I mean, has the site been returned to grass field, or is
I'll be honest, I don't know because it's not my patch,
it?
and so it's impossible for me to know about every site. So I don't know, but whatever has happened, it has been regularised now, so there's not an issue there.
May I ask a question?
Yes, because it has an emergency number should any breaches, like you were mentioning, Lewis, happen, she can ring them and they can move in.
So it has to go through the clerk.
I think that's the best way to do it,
Or is
yes.
it a public number?
It's a number that was given to me. I don't know if I can give
Is it a public number, or is it a...
you would phone, if it's out of hours, then what you could do is just phone the
Is that
emergency.
for the public to have?
Yeah, it sits on the website.
So we'll publicise it.
So maybe publicise it.
Yeah. Right. Donna, thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome.
Sidlesham Memorial Recreation Ground. Mr. Ross,
That's me.
with your business accounts.
Okay. I'm assuming that you all have updated copies of the management account. If you haven't, I've got a few spare. I've got some spare.
Somebody needs that.
I've got some
That's how you get small. Just the accounts for the.
Yeah.
I would like the memorial.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So when we're looking at the updated figures for February, I just need to say, please don't say how well we are doing, because the first thing to tell you is that we had the Ferry Farm grant of £3,000 in, and that appears on the last line of the income against choir deposits and grants. So you see £3,200 there. 3,000 of that is actually the Ferry Farm grant, which has not been spent, so there's no cost against it. So that's an important thing. And again, if you look down to the bottom line, where the year-to-date surplus is shown as just short of £10,000, 9,900, one has to deduct from that, to be realistic, the Ferry Farm grant of 3,000. So your real surplus is 6,900. As far as I'm concerned, that means things are going on reasonably steadily, because a year ago the net income was £5,261. So we're slightly ahead of the situation a year ago. There's one or two things that I'm relatively pleased about. But one is the weather has been absolutely awful. Therefore, masses of games have been postponed or cancelled, and yet the expense of lining still has had to go ahead, because you never know on a Tuesday what the weather's going to be like on the Saturday. So we're incurring some costs for football without actually obtaining the income.
Will those matches be rescheduled as they're part of the league?
Many of them will be, but at the moment, because there's been such an enormous backlog, it is questionable. And I imagine that can only mean extension of the season, etc., etc. But that's undefined at the moment. So where we're looking at is really not 9,900 surplus. I would prefer to call it 6,900 by removing the £3,000 income from Ferry Farm. I know we've got on the agenda to cover the Ferry Farm issue, so I'm just going to park that for the moment. In terms of what else is happening, I just remind you that we had 2 cancellations of plays, and there is one still in existence, and that's Big Mailing coming up at the end of this month. One of the big issues there is if you cancel 2 plays, that means 6 nights of performance, plus it's also the loss of the income for what I call read-through nights. So that can have a significant effect. The upside is that we're not seeing, you aren't seeing it specifically, but there's a lot of good things happening down at the hall. There is line dancing, with average people, 35 to 40 people. So the hall is being very effectively used. There's another young children's, and there have been at the young children's group, there have been about 12 to 14 people, but it's a solid income earner, put it that way. So some really good use of the hall and the associated rooms. at the present time.
Excellent.
Let me just stop there and inquire of councillors, is there anything you'd like to add, question?
Just a question, how much income as a percentage do you think the hall generates as opposed to the rest of the building?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I've had people come to me who use the smaller room to say, look, the hall is bigger, but we need the room, but I don't want to be charged fortune for electricity. So in order to retain them, I've let the hall go at the small room rate as a compromise for the heating, which is really very important.
The reason for the question was, in a future plan of developing the buildings and whatever, is there a need for that hall?
Well, I would rephrase that.
At the cost of what it would cost, yes.
I rephrase that question to say, if I was starting afresh, would I start where we are now? And the answer is no. And what I mean by that is, look, you've got a committee room, you've got a room where Infinity have a bar, you have the associated room, and you have a hall. There's too many rooms there for a village of this size. So you wouldn't plan it if you were saying to the architect, draw up a plan for what would do this. You would be saying it wouldn't be what you've got there now. The footprint is too big, basically.
It's something I was talking to the chairman about, and I mentioned it to the club the other day, is I know there was some surveys done, maybe even an architect to employ, I'm not too sure, Adrian and Tricia here, to design a new hall some years ago. Do those designs still hold good? Because as we progress forward and we start making money, and should we need to go for a lottery grant, I think we need to have a goal. We need to know what does this new hall look like. And I think Lewis is absolutely right.
I think
It shouldn't look like it does at the moment.
No, absolutely
to
not.
answer your question, I think the answer to that was it was in-house designs.
Okay.
Paul Bedford, I think, is one. I had another version, but I don't think we actually employed.
We did employ an architect who was prepared to do it for free, and I still got those plans.
In your time?
Yes,
Opposed to
in
before.
my time.
In your time, yes.
And that's about 12 years, by the way.
Well, if you could,
Not as long as you.
I think not at the next council meeting, but sometime in the near future, I think we need to resurrect those plans and look at the vision of what we want in the future before we spend huge amounts of money with lots of bits of sticky plaster to try and patch up the building. We might have to come to a stage where we say, forget that bit. Can we take it away?
I think I suggested that the last time we talked about it. What can we sacrifice, and could we keep what we've got, get rid of something, reduce the size of the buildings, even if it meant, breaking up the back wall and knocking that bit down? Because I can't see really any different argument than there's been for many, many years about us borrowing millions it would now be, to start looking at a new build. When it was a few hundred thousand, but the cost will be enormous now.
It depends whether we want it or not.
Well, it depends whether it can be justified. That's the point. We want it, but it can't be justified. When we've got